Good morning, everyone. We are from Jueves Philippines Inc., and we are going to present presentation renderings using Lumen in Twinmotion. Okay, so let us introduce ourselves first. My name is John Anthony Jueves, but you can call me Anton, and I have been with Studio West Philippines for 8 years now. I currently serve as the training supervisor, handling new hire onboarding and design operations training.
And my name is Kate Cruz, a designer at Studio West for about 6 years. I mainly work with Steelcase furniture dealerships.
This is actually our first time presenting at CET Experience. We usually just purchase on-demand tickets and wait for the recordings, but this year is different because we're finally attending in person to show our work and discuss our process. So let me just outline the flow of our discussion for this topic. We'll start with a brief description of Twinmotion. When did we start using Twinmotion? Also a brief description about Lumen, comparison between standard Lumen and Path Tracer, our Lumen rendering process, and we'll show you sample renderings using Lumen. What is Twinmotion? Twinmotion is a real-time 3D architectural visualization tool that allows users to easily produce high-quality images, panoramas, and standard or 360-degree VR videos in seconds. Unlike other rendering software like Lumion, Enscape, or 3ds Max, though they offer high level of realism and advanced customization, they may come at the cost of rendering speed, which is lower than Twinmotion. And just for an FYI, those using Twinmotion 2023, the exposure and white balance settings were located under the Environment tab. But in the 2024 version, these settings have been moved to the Camera tab. And if you've noticed lens flares in your videos or images with the 2024 version, it's because the bloom intensity and lens flare settings have default values. To avoid these flares, simply remove these values. When did we start using Twinmotion? Studio West is an offshore company offering design services for US furniture dealers. For us to be able to give the best service that we can provide, we would frequently update ourselves with the latest software that our clients might likely use. Then, as soon as we learned that CET has collaborated with Twinmotion, we immediately learned the software ourselves as well as the members of the team to make sure that they are ready to use Twinmotion anytime there are demands for renderings using the software. For those who haven't explored Twinmotion, you can purchase and download its extension from the marketplace. This includes the bundle of the Twinmotion for CT extension and the Twinmotion software. Now, let's briefly define Lumen. Twinmotion is already trusted for its rendering capabilities even in real-time mode. With Unreal Engine 5's Lumen system for dynamic global illumination and reflections, many wanted it in Twinmotion too. Well, actually, Lumen was added to Twinmotion in Q4 of 2023. Lumen enables indirect lighting to adapt on the fly to changes to direct lighting or geometry. For example, changing the sun's angle with the time of day or opening an exterior door. It brings new level of realism to real-time applications and enables you to render gorgeous stills and videos with close to path traced quality but just in a fraction of the time. Let me show you some major technical differences between standard and Lumen rendered images. I've also included a path trace rendered image for comparison. As a disclaimer, the sample area is just a small sized collaboration area. By looking at these images, you can instantly see the differences between standard and Lumen and also the path tracer. Lumen provides a well-lit interior similar to path tracing, but path tracing offers sharper lines and more realistic colors. In this table, I've labeled Lumen as better in terms of realism and quality. However, the highlight for me is the export time difference of just 24 seconds between standard and Lumen, even though they can be achieved with the same graphics card. Although you'll notice that the usage of our GPU RAM will sometimes get so high when using Lumen because it really depends on your graphics card. Most users recommend having a higher end graphics card to avoid this issue. It's best to have one with 16 gig or more. Now, let me show you the difference between working with Lumen and Path Tracer, which are the better and best options respectively. On the left side, you can see the real-time global illumination without pixelation as I pan across the workspace with Lumen enabled. In contrast, the video on the right side with path tracer enabled requires rendering every time you move through the workspace. This rendering time varies depending on whether you're in low, medium, or high quality mode. So to weigh our options and their pros and cons, it's really worth trying and using Lumen when rendering. Okay, so now let me share with you our Lumen rendering process through these examples. These are Lumen rendered images with and without an HDRI environment. So just to define HDRI environment, this provides an alternative background and lighting for our spaces. Each image uses different settings which we will show you in the next slides. But as you can see, these images are already worthy of client presentations. The first step is to enable Lumen under the Render tab. The reason I set this up first is to see the overall lighting, making it easier to adjust the rest of the settings. When enabling Lumen, it's best to experiment with the settings to find the rendering style that suits your taste. For both of these renderings, I simply maximize all the settings under the global illumination, so they're the scene detail, view distance, and lighting update speed, and lumen reflection settings, which are the quality and bounce count. Then, I left the shadows on their default settings. From my experience, and based on what I've researched, maximizing global illumination and lumen reflection settings usually results in the best effects of lights and reflections, especially for indoor spaces where there are many objects. However, you should test it out to determine which settings you prefer the most. Second, adjusting the environment. One major effect that I take time to adjust when using Lumen is global lighting under the environment settings. This involves adjusting the sun's intensity and ambience. You can also choose either a warmer or cooler lighting effect. For this rendering without HDRI background, I adjusted the time of the day to noon with an sun intensity of 500. Then, you can freely adjust the rest of the options as you see fit. I typically maximize the ambient setting for interiors, which is the overall illumination, and then go to the camera tab to adjust the exposure and white balance. The values you set for these two depend on the space you're rendering. Most of the time, spaces with windows require less exposure. For the local exposure, which includes highlight reduction and shadow boost, I keep the default settings because I don't see any major difference when I adjust them. Next, for this rendering with an HDRI background, I used the same global light settings from the first example, then enabled the HDRI environment. I used backdrop HDRI for this and will show you later its difference with Sky Dome. The intensity and rotation values are up to you as they can be tricky depending on your choice of HDRI background. You also notice that lock sun to HDRI is not enabled because I prefer the sun to stay where it was according to my adjustments in the global lighting. However, if you want the sun to move with your background as you rotate, you can enable this feature. And when you expand the details on the left side, you can adjust the size, height offset, projection offset, and tilt of the background. The values for these settings depend on the background and there will be a lot of trial and error here. For the HDRI environment, you can explore the library which has plenty of options for skies, indoors, outdoors, and studio settings. For this rendering, I used one of the backgrounds from the outdoor category. And most importantly, modifying the materials. When modifying materials, one thing to remember is to ensure that they do not appear flat. There are a few elements I always adjust: grunge, luminosity, UV, normal, and roughness. If you decide to keep your CET materials, they sometimes tend to change their properties when used in Twinmotion. Let's start with grunge and luminosity under color. Grunge makes your material appear more organic and realistic. It adds dark patches, making it look worn off, as seen in this example, depending on the value you set. Then, you adjust the luminosity if the actual swatch of the material doesn't match what was exported in Twinmotion. Luminosity helps you lighten or darken the material. Next, adjusting the UV improves the scale and rotation of your materials, especially if they're too small when exported. Sometimes you can't see the texture if you don't adjust the scale. In this example, I set the scale to zero point 0.5, making the texture of the upholstery very visible, which helps to suggest that the material is indeed upholstery. Next, adjust the normal map, which controls the bumpiness of the material. I usually do this only for upholstery. I download the same material, upload it in the normal map, and then adjust the intensity. This adds depth to your material. And lastly, for materials, adjust the roughness, which controls the reflection. You adjust roughness if you need reflections for surfaces like reflective laminates, metallic objects, glass, etc. The value you set for roughness depends on your 3D view camera angle. Always test your render to see if you're satisfied with the reflection. In addition to enhancing your renderings with Lumen, achieving the perfect camera angle and quality can further improve the results. I usually experiment with a focal length of 20 to 26 mm so that the angle of view is closer to that of a standard lens. Then, I adjust the sharpness to around 20 to 40% depending on your preference. After that, I always enable parallelism so that all the vertical lines in the perspective are parallel and do not appear distorted. Now, let's try exporting this image and observe it in real time how long it takes. Typically, I don't change any options during the export process. You can choose either PNG or JPEG, that's entirely up to you. However, I leave the rest of the options as they are because any changes could increase the export time. Once the export dialog box appears, you'll notice that it often indicates a lengthy export time which could even span hours. However, this time will gradually change. It might even fluctuate, increasing and decreasing, so it's not entirely accurate. In this example, the process took about 55 seconds to complete. If it does not export within 2 to 3 minutes max for an image done in Lumen, there might be a problem. In that case, I suggest terminating the export and restarting the Twinmotion software. So, as you can see in the dialog box, it's now 5 minutes 25 seconds. And then it went down to 5 minutes 9 seconds, down to 4 minutes 21 seconds, to 3 minutes 48 seconds, and so on. And it went back up to 4 minutes 2 seconds, and then that's it. So all in all, it took about 55 seconds. Before I give the floor to Kate, let me just do a very quick recap of the Lumen rendering process. So first, you have to enable Lumen, experiment with the global illumination and lumen reflection settings. Experiment with environment, like adjusting the global lighting or ambience, or enable HDRI. Modify the materials like the grunge, luminosity, UV, reflection, and normal, which is the bump. And adjust the camera angle like the focal length, sharpness, and enable parallelism. Then the normal export time usually ranges from 1 to 2 minutes, especially for medium-sized spaces. Based on my experience, Lumen in Twinmotion has a lot of potential. It's not yet perfect, but it's workable and can produce quality outputs suitable for client presentations. So now let me call on Kate to show you some sample Lumen renderings.
Thanks, Anton. Now let me show you some sample renderings we made and share the specific techniques to enhance each one. For the following images, the processing time took 1 to 2 hours, which involves setting up the lighting, camera, and materials. The extent of the processing is usually up to you, and if you're already set about what to adjust in Twinmotion, you can reduce the processing time. The amazing part is when you export these images, it only takes about 1 to 2 minutes and sometimes even less than a minute. For this example with cove lighting, neon light was placed, stretched, and adjusted to a warmer tone. If you don't have a cove light yet and can't edit in CET, you can create one using primitive objects and shape it into a rectangle. Next is if your clients don't have a specific choice for walls and floors, we recommend using the available Twinmotion materials since these already provide excellent effects when rendered. For example, these planks show great light refraction. For glass walls, we usually opt for item glass due to its good reflection. Lastly, one of the many benefits of having a Twinmotion license is gaining access to megascans. These are high quality, photorealistic assets that help in improving renderings. For this example, the decal stone mosaic is placed by the TV wall, which shows hyperrealism evident in its texture, color, and overall appearance. For this example, notice that using Lumen's overall illumination is already sufficient to light up the rendering. But to enhance it even further, you can illuminate objects such as the lighting fixtures. Initially, lighting fixtures don't have a glow yet when exported from CET. So to add this, simply select the material of the lighting fixture, go to emissive, and then add glow units. You can also adjust the color temperature to either a warmer or a cooler tone. Next, if you want the rendering to look like it was taken with a camera, focusing on certain objects and blurring the background, Twinmotion can achieve this by adjusting the depth of field. The depth of field refers to the range of distance that appears acceptably sharp. In the given example, it focuses on the equipment. To do this, simply enable the depth of field, click Pick Focus, and select the equipment area. Set the distance to 100 centimeters to create a blur effect in the background, but always test it to get the perfect blurring effect. Then, keep the aperture and bokeh shape as default. When rendering with an outdoor view using HDRI environment, there are two features that can be used. One is Sky Dome and the other is Backdrop HDRI. In the first example, Sky Dome was used. It has no built-in ground, so you need to add your own landscaping or outdoor elements such as vehicles or characters. The advantage of this is a sharper quality consistent with your interiors. In the second example, the Backdrop HDRI was used. This already includes a built-in ground, and you can modify its height and projection to achieve the perfect quality. It's also best for areas located at ground level. Additionally, if your space is outdoors, Lumen is easier to use because you don't have to maximize all settings. You just need to adjust the global lighting and HDRI environment to get the best angle for the sun, the right mixture of light, and the perfect view for the background. For panoramas, same process applies as creating images. First, test an image in Lumen and make your modifications. Then, when you create the panorama, make sure that the surroundings of your chosen viewpoint are the same quality as it will rotate 360 degrees. Export options we use are the JPEG format, which results in a smaller file size, and the resolution is 8K. We don't enable motion blur unless there are animated objects, and exporting takes about 6 minutes for a 4K resolution and about 12 minutes for an 8K resolution for this medium-sized area. We prefer the 8K resolution because it provides greater sharpness and clarity when exported. For video in Lumen, it can be quite tricky. Most parts of the video turn out to be good quality, but you'll notice some flickering and noise when materials are reflective. However, if you consider the overall quality, it's already good for presentation. For this video, the processing time also took about 1 to 2 hours. Same with panorama, we always create images first before we do the video because it's easier to make modifications. Once your images are set, the video will be very easy to make. For the export settings, we maintain the default frame rate at 30. Anything higher than that will significantly increase the export time. This 40-second video, for example, took about 10 minutes to export at 2K resolution and 25 minutes for 4K resolution. And unlike in panorama, we don't recommend using 8K resolution for video because it keeps on crashing. But this depends on your machine's capabilities. In relation to the image sample with depth of field, you can also apply this effect on video. You can use the same settings and just choose your focus. In this example, the focus is on the back of the task chairs. Also, this video is a sideways walking motion without any changes in elevation. To achieve this, pick first your initial clip, Then the important step is to click the right arrow key without moving your mouse until you reach the view where you want your motion to end. Finally, click Add Clip button and adjust the time. The only disadvantage of using this technique is that it takes time to export. For this 8-second video, it took about 3 minutes to export. This example combines standard and Lumen quality with animation. The animation was done in standard mode and uses translators. Translators are added to move objects along the XYZ axis, but they are quite difficult to use due to their limited capabilities. This example also shows a unique technique, transitioning into a fully accessorized interior done in Lumen. This video's processing time took about 3 hours because there was a lot of trial and error when using translators. However, each animation set was exported in just 3 minutes, and we merged them through Canva. Next, this Lumen rendered video shows animation using rotators, and these rotators were applied to the ceiling fans. Just like translators, they also have limited capabilities, which I think Twinmotion will soon improve. An additional tip, Twinmotion has a lot of vegetation materials and elements. We didn't add any plants in this video's CET file. Instead, all plants were added in Twinmotion because they were more realistic. You can see green walls, trees, flowers, vines, and other vegetation elements. They really help make the space look organic and fresh, and literally they added life to this space. And lastly, Twinmotion has the ability to customize video sizes. It can adapt to whatever platform we plan to showcase our works on, especially now where everything needs to be accessible on our mobile phones. Just like this video example done in Lumen, we can create video sizes for Instagram and Facebook Reels. The only thing you need to remember when working with this video size is to increase the focal length. In this example, we used a 67 mm focal length. Although Lumen shows significant potential in rendering, there are still limitations. Rendering neighborhoods will be very challenging in Lumen. And depending on your machine, rendering neighborhoods could take about 3 to 4 hours of processing time due to the large area. The result may not turn out as you expect, however, we believe that Twinmotion will address this issue.
To wrap up the presentation, I'll quickly demonstrate the Twinmotion tips mentioned earlier and highlight the importance of having Twinmotion for CT extension. So how do you achieve the sideways walking motion without changing the elevation? First, select your initial clip. In small rooms like this conference room, it can be quite challenging to get a perfect view because the walls obstruct the shot. However, you can remove the walls by adjusting the lens settings. For example, if this is the initial clip, simply add it by clicking the plus button. Then to remove the walls, go to the camera tab, find the lens settings, expand the details, and adjust the near clipping until the walls are completely gone. This adjustment essentially widens the view of the room. To achieve the sideways walking motion without changing the elevation, follow these steps. So click the right arrow key until you reach the desired end view. Avoid moving your mouse to maintain the same elevation. Then click the plus button to add that view and try to play the video. So you can see a sideways walking motion without changing the elevation. Next, if you want the last clip to transition smoothly to the next clip, let's say it will face the whiteboard without changing the camera's last position, just follow these steps. So click the last clip. Instead of clicking the plus button for the keyframe, click the plus button to add a video part. This will create and separate the next clip. Then set your next view to the whiteboard by rotating the camera. Okay. And then click the plus button for the keyframe. Adjust the duration to make the transition faster. So let's make this 7 seconds and this one as well. Then play the video from the start to see the transition. Lastly, why is it important to have the Twinmotion for CET extension? Without it, one way to export your CET file to Twinmotion is by converting it to FBX. Let's try it with the CET file. So go to File, Import and Export, then click Export Drawing, and just select FBX, then save. The problem is that even if you set your settings to the maximum, like the level of detail to super, and even enabling double-sided meshes, some symbols may not render correctly in Twinmotion. So after the export, let's check this in Twinmotion. Once you're in Twinmotion, instead of direct linking, we'll import the file through geometry. So let's open the file, import, keep both. So let's check the symbols. You can see that these chairs, which are supposed to have mesh backs, do not. If you compare it with the CET file, they do not have the same settings and same quality. However, if you have the Twinmotion for CET extension, you can enable the linking in CET and then import it into Twinmotion. So let's start the syncing, and then go to Twinmotion, import through direct link, keep both, then wait for the sync, and then let's check the symbols. Okay, so look at the chairs now. They have the correct mesh backs just like in the CET file. So I highly recommend getting the extension because it offers many advantages compared to other export options. That's it. We hope we're able to give you something to help with your Twinmotion renderings using Lumen. Thank you for listening. This has been Anton and Cate from Studio West, Philippines.